Paul back here again. I hope you're all recovered from our hop extravaganza. I've got to introduce you now to Jeremy Swainson from Utopian Brewery. It's great to have Jeremy on board with us today. He's going to give us a talk on British hops, innovation, and lager brewing, having had quite a bit of experience in this, and having tried his Utopian British Pilsner the other day, I can say he knows a lot about the subject. So I'm going to leave Jeremy to it. I'll be on the Q&A, and I'll also be around at the end if anybody wants to answer more questions then. So Jeremy, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I trust you've all had an interesting and informative day so far. Thanks for sticking around to hear me ramble on about hops and my favorite topic, lager. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you just write them in the discussion, once I'm done presenting, I'll see how many I can get to. So today we're going to kick off with a discussion around British hops. So from variety selection to some of the techniques that we're using. And for that, we'll be looking at two of the core beers we're brewing at Utopian Brewing, a Helles and a Pilsner style. After that, I'm going to take a dive into the wonderful world of lager. I'll tell you a bit about the history, why I love lager so much, and maybe you can get some tips on how you can up your lager game. Before we get into it, I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name's Jeremy Swainson. I am the head brewer at Utopian Brewing down in sunny Devon. I got my start in brewing over in Germany, making alt beer at Privatbrauerei Bolton. It's the oldest alt beer brewery in the world, which is quite a dubious title if I ever heard one. A few years later, I did my brewmaster diploma at Dömens in Munich, and then I made the jump over the channel to brew lager for Camden Town Brewery. For the last couple of years, I've been with Utopian Brewing, which was founded in 2018 and began production in February 2019. The brewery was founded on a few key principles. So we only brew lagers, and that means beers fermented with lager yeast. And we brew those beers using 100% British ingredients. And we do this for two reasons. First, we want to celebrate the great hop varieties and maltings that we have right here in the UK. And secondly, it's a small step to reducing our food miles, which works towards our aim to be as sustainable as we can. The name of the brewery comes from a work done by William Morris, News from Nowhere, which was really fitting as the brewery was originally planned to be housed in a former William Morris textile fabric in London. But after the decision was made to move down to rural Devon, the name just stuck. So when it came time to design the beers that we wanted to brew, I've got to admit, I had zero experience with British hops. So I knew, East Kent Golding's reputation as being quite earthy. And frankly, I really had some doubts about its potential use in lagers. But you have to start somewhere. So like anybody would, I made a table with all the chemical compounds in British hop varieties and compared it with the German and Czech hops that I actually wanted to brew with. Specifically, I was looking for a few characteristics which are typical of the European noble hop varieties, such as Saaz, Tettnang, Spalt, and Hersbrucker. Noble hops all have a low alpha to beta acid ratio, which is thought to lead to a softer and cleaner bitterness. I was also looking at farnesene levels, which are a defining aroma compound of all of these varieties, and I was looking for low cohumulone levels. So after comparing some 20 varieties, to be honest, I wasn't much further than when I started. German and English hops are just different. But we did manage to identify some varieties that we were keen to use. First Gold, for example, and Boadicea both had great potential as bittering hops, at least on paper. If you don't know Boadicea, it's been around since 2004 and was billed as the world's first aphid-resistant hop variety. And for reasons I can't fully understand, hardly anyone uses it. It's actually become one of our go-to hop varieties and appears in most of the beers that we brew. So using, at least in part, the relatively useless data from this table that I made, we started putting together our first recipes. The first beer that we brewed back in February 2019 was our premium British lager. It's a Bavarian-style Helles, almost all Pilsner malt, pale in color, low bitterness, medium-bodied. It's a crisp, easy drinking lager. So this is the beer that we were really looking to turn macro lager drinkers onto in the pub. The hops we're using in it are First Gold, East Kent Goldings, and Fuggles, all in the boil. And this being our flagship beer, we wanted to go as traditional as possible. So we went with the British equivalent to noble hops. And you can't really get more British than Fuggles and EKG. When we're looking at hopping a delicate light lager, there are a few concepts that we're working with to ensure maximal drinkability, balance, and flavor. There's a concept in lager brewing which is best described as the potential hop capacity of a beer. If you look at hopping a beer, like adding salt to a dish, certain things, like how fatty the food is, will increase the amount of salt necessary to balance it. Think salted pork belly. So with a balanced lager, we're looking at hops in the same light. Increasing the final gravity or increasing the ABV, increasing the malt flavor and aroma will all require an increase in the hopping rate to achieve the same balance. When it comes to hop choice for a beer like this, we previously mentioned the alpha to beta ratio and its potential importance to lending a clean and smooth bitterness. First off, we're not using any high alpha varieties, which could lead to a harsher quality of the bitterness. And we're also getting about 30 to 40% of our bitterness from low alpha varieties added later in the boil. In this case, that's EKG and Fuggles. We're also blending our bittering additions. As a small brewer buying small quantities of hops, we regularly see our alpha acids fluctuating. And to minimize the effects of this fluctuation and to maximize the consistency of the beer, we spread the bittering addition over a couple of varieties. Another concept which is becoming more popular with IPA brewers is doing aroma additions. So for us, that's anything added to the kettle with less than 30 minutes in the boil, based on milliliters of oil per hectoliter of wort. Again, similar to alpha acids changing, we need to keep both the bitterness and the aroma consistent. All of the hops that we're adding to a light lager like this are going to be added latest with 10 minutes to go in the boil to reduce green or grassy aromas, which could get in the way of the malt aroma. The second beer that we wanted to brew went in a different direction completely. So it's loosely based on a Czech style pils, so full-bodied, deep color, but we wanted the beer to have an intense hop flavor and aroma, specifically a fruity, punchy, New World aroma, pushing the boundaries of what most people expect from a lager. This was a beer that we knew from the beginning we could use to showcase some of the new varieties of hops being developed in this country and hopefully create something which is truly distinct. When it came to variety selection for this beer, the technical data and spreadsheets are pretty much useless. And as all of you know here, the best way to analyze a hop for its potential aroma in a beer is to rub it. So initially we identified 4 hop varieties we were interested in: Jester, Olicana, Godiva, and Mystic. And as a team in the brewery, we did a hop rub to decide which we liked most. We were looking at 2 criteria. intensity of aroma, and quality of aroma. With quality of aroma, we're talking about a couple of things here. So we're looking for the presence of that fruit character or the resin, and we're also looking for an absence of onion, garlic, any raw flavors which we don't want to add to the beer. So from this initial rub, we decided to use Jester in the first iteration of Pils, and that was in the form of a large dose of T90 pellets in the whirlpool. Over the last year and a half, Pils has continued to develop, and it's gone through a few iterations. First, we moved the whirlpool addition to a dry hop to increase the overall aroma. And then after a discussion with Will Rogers, we introduced T45 pellets, which are lupulin-enriched pellets. So you have less of the green plant material and more of the positive aroma components, the lupulin that we want. And then after getting our hands on some incredibly aromatic Olicana, we brought that into the mix. And finally, we've slowly moved more of that Olicana into the whirlpool, sort of going full circle on this beer. So working in a small brewery who's trying to establish itself in the market, I've got a bit of a flexible attitude towards consistency. In our Helles, what defines that beer is balance. So it's incredibly important that we're doing everything we can to keep it consistent. What defines Pils, though, is the intense hop aroma and flavor. And striving to get that right where we want it in the long run is far more important than making sure it tastes exactly the same every time. So consistency shouldn't mean stagnation. We will also be keeping a close eye on the new hop varieties coming out of the breeding program. Harlequin shows a lot of promise. We were blown away by it last year at Brow. So we're going to keep a close eye on things to see how we can continue to improve this beer and other hop-forward beers that we bring out in the future. So why are British hops interesting to small brewers in this country? A theme which I'll come back to a couple of times today is the importance for small brewers to brew distinct beers of character. I want our customers to know at the first sip who brewed their beer. It should taste distinctly utopian. And the selection of our raw materials is a huge part of this. Using British hops also gives real credentials of provenance to the beers. The craft beer movement has so far piggybacked on the local and artisanal trends worldwide, but as craft becomes global, how do we as small brewers set ourselves apart from the Sierra Nevadas and the Brewdogs of the world? If every IPA brewer in this country is trying to clone Trillium's latest haze bomb, or if every lager brewer is trying to recreate Augustiner, then we really lose out on what makes beer and the craft beer movement so unique, which, at least for me, is local taste and variation. The environmental impact of our supply chain is also not something to be taken lightly. The best hops from America or New Zealand need to be shipped cold, and this takes increased energy and increases CO2 emissions. Without getting too preachy here, there's a real danger for breweries to be left behind if they aren't shown to at least have an eye on sustainability and their supply chain. In a way, this breeding program from Charles Faram could be the answer to the environmental impact of shipping hops around the world, at least for us in the UK, and to the question of celebrating local variation within the craft segment. And the hops being developed will only continue to improve through the feedback of brewers who are giving them a chance. My advice to brewers out there today is don't be afraid to experiment. We are absolutely spoiled for choice with hops from around the globe, but at the same time, we have some incredible varieties being developed right here in the UK. While hops and IPA often take center stage in the craft beer world, we're going to move on to something much less sexy now. Lager in the UK. So Lager is dominated by macro brands. This is where the cold, fizzy yellow idea comes from. Brands like Heineken, Foster's, Carlsberg, and I'm proud to say that Carling, the brand with arguably the largest impact on Brits' understanding of lager, was actually founded in my home country of Canada back in 1870. There's no real innovation in the macro lager market as far as flavor and real variety are concerned, unless you count Carlsberg's new Pilsner. And in part, craft brewing was a response to that. And you know, there's very good reason why craft brewers have mainly been focused on ales. At the same time, if the majority of lager drinkers aren't going to be turned on to ale, then it doesn't make any sense for us not to try and get a slice of that pie. And brewers like Camden and Meantime have seen huge success and have paved the way for other small brewers to produce and sell lager successfully in this country as well. So what is lager? Well, apart from yellow, fizzy, and cold, it can also be black, fizzy, and cold. On the surface, this may seem to be an easy question, but cultural differences and differing brewing traditions have led to multiple interpretations of what constitutes a lager. The answer is actually remarkably simple. A lager is any beer which has been fermented with Saccharomyces carlsbergensis, otherwise known as lager yeast. Lager yeasts are hybrids of Saccharomyces cerevisiae and a wild yeast, which researchers believe to be Saccharomyces oibyanus, which is resistant to cold temperatures. When exactly lager yeast appeared as we know it and began being used for fermentation isn't exactly known, but by the 15th century, some Bavarian brewers were using what was termed then as bottom fermenting yeasts. Lager is a family of beers, so it accounts for a whole array of different styles. And one thing that unites them is they are typically accessible, clean, and full-flavored. Brewing was traditionally a seasonal endeavor. Through experience, brewers in Bavaria learned that if they brewed when the ambient temperature was colder, the beer had a lower chance of getting sick, otherwise infected with bacteria. The typical brewing season until the invention of artificial cooling at the end of the 19th century started in October or November and ended in about March or up to April. This led to a problem, namely that good beer wasn't available in the summer months, and here's where lager brewing comes in. Lager beer was produced, a lot like India Pale Ale, in order to survive the summer months so that you could still get a decent pint in September and October. The period of cold storage, called Lagern in German, led to the use of the word lager to describe bottom fermented beers. This might be why some brewers believe that lagering their ales somehow makes them lagers. Sorry to tell you, but this is false. Kolsch and Altbier, both lagered ales from Germany, are not hybrid styles. They're just not lagers. With the introduction of modern malting techniques and the indirect kiln from England, higher quality, more consistent, and paler malts became available, which led to the development of the various styles we know today, like Pilsner, Vienna, and Helles. With the advent of artificial cooling at the end of the 19th century, brewers around the world could start making lagers, and it really took off. So, paired with mass consumerism in the 20th century and the rise of brands like Coca-Cola, Wonder Bread, the most successful macro brands began to resemble one another closely, and the beers slowly became paler and, frankly, more bland. But it's what people wanted, so don't blame Bud. One place that didn't happen was in Franconia, a small region in Upper Bavaria. Touring breweries here can be like walking through a museum. Here's a picture of one of the many working cool ships in the region. This one is in action at Klosterbrauerei Ulsberg. You're more likely to find a coolship here than you are in Belgium, and they're not making lambics with them, they're making clean lagers. This picture is a traditional mash kettle, which is meant for boiling mash during a decoction. It's a nearly unused technique of mashing outside of Germany and the Czech Republic. And the chains at the bottom of the kettle are actually there just to prevent mash from sticking and burning to the bottom. Pretty wild. Oh, I'll stick here for a second. Similar to the traditional ale brewers in this country, with open square fermenters or party guile techniques. Also similar to innovative microbrewers who are pushing the boundaries of what was traditionally acceptable. These lager brewers in Franconia are steadfast in their passion for making distinct, flavorful, and unique beers. And these are definitely the beers who inspire the lagers that we're making at Utopian. So I'm going to jump into some of the areas where lager brewing diverges from ale brewing. And we'll start with water, or brewing liquor. This is something a lot of brewers worry about when brewing lager, rightfully so, especially when brewing pale lagers, Pilsner or Helles. Excessive sulfates or chlorides can easily get in the way of the subtle malt-hop balance. Also, if your water is highly alkaline, the already pale grist will push the mash pH up and out of your amylase enzyme optimum. I think here it's also quite important not to focus on replicating a certain city's water like Munich or Pilsner, and rather make sure that the pH throughout the process is well controlled. Here in Devon, we're really lucky to have incredibly soft water, and we end up supplementing it with a bit of chloride and sulfate. But if you do want to brew lager and you're in an area with less fortunate water, there's no reason why you can't continue to brew certain styles. Export, Dunkel, and Vienna can be really forgiving of a can't remember the word. They're much more forgiving. Don't worry. So mashing's really the next big change from ale brewing. The primary goal of wort production is to bring components from the malt into solution, thereby producing wort. This process happens physically and biochemically and sets the stage for the character of the beer. The method, timing, temperature of the mash will set the fermentability of the wort and will influence the foam and haze stability of the beer, as well as the protein polyphenol makeup, which is going to influence your body. And traditionally, lager brewers use either a step mash or decoction mashing. In a step mash, the mash is heated through a series of step temperatures, typically 60 degrees, 70 degrees, and a mash out at 76 or 78. In a decoction mash, a portion of the mash is pumped into the kettle, boiled, and subsequently returned to the mash, thereby increasing the mash temperature to the next step. The Germans, and even more so the Czechs, really aren't fans of infusion mashing, to say the least. I actually had teachers in Germany who insisted single infusion couldn't actually be possible, even though obviously in this country they've been doing it for centuries with quite some success. Decoction mashing is something that really divides brewers. Advocates argue that flavor and color can be added to the beer through this process. And there's a lot of critics out there, most of them who probably haven't done a decoction mash before, who claim the technique is antiquated and unnecessary with modern malts. As brewers, our primary focus is always on beer flavor, and the potential of decoction shouldn't be ignored. So let's have a closer look at it. Decoction is often viewed as the most traditional way of brewing in continental Europe. The idea is that malt back in the day was really poorly modified and required boiling to break down cell walls, proteins, starches. As far as I can tell, this is a myth. At the beginning of the 19th century, brewers in Germany were using a variety of mashing techniques, including infusion. And as Munich became the center of industrialized brewing in the early 19th century, brewers there found that decoction mashing resulted in a fuller-bodied beer, which people preferred. The process of boiling the mash, of course, ironed out issues with poorly milled grains and under-modified malt as well. But the driving force behind its use has always been beer flavor. And that should be particularly interesting to any small brewers out there. Over the last 50 years, decoction mashing has been in decline in Germany as more brewers find it harder to justify the energy and time needed to do it. In the Czech Republic, it's a bit different. Decoction mashing has actually been written into the protected designation of calling a beer Czech Pivo. So they're pretty much all still doing it. Boiling the mash fundamentally changes the chemical and physical composition of the wort and the resulting beer. More lower molecular polyphenols and oxidants are being released into the wort, and the grain is releasing more sugars and proteins into the wort as it's physically broken down. So regardless where you stand in the great decoction debate, the use of this mash will change your beer. This is something that we've discovered at Utopian as well through a good deal of trial and error. On the left, you can see one of our first decoction mashes just coming up to a boil in the video. And on the right, that's me with a nice long decoction stick, which we had fabricated after our first attempt at decoction mashing. To say the least, the first decoction mash didn't go too swimmingly. But you got to get creative and figure out a way to do it. So we did. And we're using decoction mashing just as one way to add depth and distinction to the beers that we brew. So it's, by no means am I saying that everybody should do it, but where you have decisions to make in the brewing process where you can add flavor and really make the beer more characterful, then you can take those decisions or not. So these are just some general points here related to step mashing and decoction at a bit of a technical level. So regardless what mash you do, acidification with lactic acid has a heap of benefits. Better foam, lighter color, higher enzymatic activity. When we're doing either a step mash or a decoction, we need to stir or pump the mash. And in order to facilitate that, you're going to be looking at higher grist or liquor to grist ratios. We should always be mashing for our malt. So if it's already highly modified, keeping the temperature above 60 will make sure that we're not breaking down foam positive proteins. And also an extended rest at 72 degrees Celsius will help form glycoproteins, which are sugar-protein bonds, which contribute to the foam and the mouthfeel of the beer. So at this point, water, mashing, pretty much the rest of wort production is going to be the same as any other beer going through your brew house. Best practices like keeping the wort turbidity down in the kettle, making sure your whirlpool runs clean, wort acidification, they're going to be the same roughly for every brewery. Fermentation, maturation, and lagering. To understand classic lager fermentation, it can help to look at how it developed. So before artificial cooling, fermentation took place in the fermentation cellar, a room with an ambient temperature between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius, and the beer was fermented in open fermentation vessels, similar to a lot of ales over here. Once the beer was nearing the end of its fermentation, the yeast stopped working and producing heat, so the temperature would naturally dip and the yeast settled to the bottom of the vessel. allowing green beer to be transferred into the lagering cellar, which was deeper in the cave or in the mountain and was significantly cooler, so about 3 degrees. Sometimes these cellars were also chilled with natural ice, either from a lake, stream, or in the picture that you can see here. This is an example of an ice stand, which is used to collect ice in the winter. And the ice is then brought into the cellars, where it helps to keep a constant cold temperature throughout the rest of the year. The modern fermentation process can be broken down into 3 phases. Fermentation, whereby the majority of the wort sugars are converted into alcohol and CO2. Maturation, which is typically considered the time it takes for diacetyl to be reduced to acceptable levels. And lagering, the storage of the beer at near to freezing temperatures to facilitate the settling of yeast, CO2 binding, and the reduction of polyphenol protein compounds. Apart from a shift to closed dual-purpose vessels with better temperature control, not a ton has actually changed in lager fermentation. So yeast is pitched at a low temperature, preventing temperature stress on the yeast and increasing the solubility of oxygen in the wort. And then the wort is allowed to rise to fermentation temperatures, which are between 8 and 12 degrees Celsius. At the lower temperatures we're talking here, you're going to need more lager yeast than you would typically use in an ale fermentation. So you're looking anywhere from 12 to 18 million cells per milliliter. And fermentation lasts between 7 and 10 days, depending on how much yeast you pitch and how warm you're fermenting the beer. In a classic fermentation, as the fermentation slows, the beer is going to be chilled down to allow for yeast harvesting, and it's ready to transfer into a lager tank or to be spunded if you're using a dual-purpose vessel. So in a classic fermentation, the temperature of the beer is going to be dropped at the end of fermentation, so it can be transferred. At this temperature, the yeast cleans up the diacetyl left in the beer quite slowly, and some brewers introduce actively fermenting wort called kreuzen at this stage, which speeds things up a bit. Alternatively, raising the temperature at the end of fermentation for a forced diacetyl rest has really become the go-to fermentation profile for a lot of craft breweries. This method guarantees a quick reduction of diacetyl, but it also is going to result in slightly higher fermentation byproducts and esters. It also, working with a bigger range of temperatures, it's going to place stress on the yeast as you're increasing temperature range. So yeah, keeping it cold, keeping it easy is definitely going to make for happier yeast. Regardless which fermentation you choose, lager beer should be lagered upwards of a week at close to freezing temperatures, or longer for higher strength beers, which will help with the stability, flavor, and the crispness of the beer. So that wraps up everything for me. I think I ran through those slides a bit faster than I expected. But yeah, thank you all for taking the time to hear me blabber on a bit. And if you've got any questions, I'll just have a look in the discussion now.
Hi, Jeremy. I've just joined you on screen. Are you able to get a picture of yourself up on the screen there, the video?
Yes, I am. Excellent.
That'll be great. And we have got quite a few questions.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. So any UK varieties anywhere near the intensity? So my screen's just flicked down there, sorry. Any UK variety anywhere near the intensity of flavour in the US? And is there any chance of that, or will that never be the case, I think? And maybe you want to have a go at that, and then I'll have a go at it afterwards as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think intensity of aroma, our experience with Jester is that it's an extraordinarily aromatic hop. The other one that we've been using in our pills is Olicana, which is slightly milder. So you may need to use more to get the same aroma. But the reason why we're using Olicana is really quality of aroma. I'm sure that if you've smelled Harlequin, that's a pretty mind blowing hop, which smells just as intense and pungent as any of the American hops right now. Paul?
It's really interesting. It's a very good question, because when we started on our program back in 2007, I hope you saw the video of Peter Glendenning and myself in the field where we started that all off a few years ago. We never sort of imagined that we'd get anywhere near where we've got today in terms of aroma. So when you think about where we are now compared to where we thought we might be, we're way further on. So what's possible in the future, it's very difficult to say. But as I said in the video, Peter Glendenning tells me that every year we go by, we get a 5% increase in intensity of flavor. At least, I think in his next generation, he's even seeing higher increases in flavor on that side. So it's quite interesting, because we really want to get something like a Citra Mosaic or a Simcoe that we can grow in the UK. But at the same time, we don't want to lose all the good things we've got, from the traditional flavor from the terroir of the UK. So really, it's about increasing the palette that the grower can offer you as brewers, and increase that range of flavors that you've got a whole selection there to choose from. I'm totally with Jeremy on the need to try and buy locally and to use locally grown ingredients, because to me, bringing stuff halfway across the world, it's great to get the flavors, but at the same time, we've got to be thinking a little bit more about what we're doing long term here. How is this going to impact the planet? How can we start to save CO2 emissions and things like that, and growing stuff that locally, that we can sell locally and use locally, and bring into products, let's say, that we grow in that are traditionally US or Czech or German products that we are making in the UK, gives them that something special, which is the terroir of this country. And I think that's quite an important thing to try and bring that in. So it's a great question, Richard, and I hope that's answered it a bit. We are really looking forward. I'm actually got it on my bucket list to try and get varieties that are up there with Citra, Simcoe, and Mosaic in terms of flavour. Whether we'll ever get there, who knows? But I'm really, we're going to try. That's for sure. We're definitely going to try. Are you able to use a British yeast strain to make lagers? Is this something you looked into or want to look into, Jeremy?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a bit ridiculous to give a yeast strain a nationality. But anyways, we did look into it. So there was in the National Yeast Bank, there is a lager yeast strain which has been isolated from a British brewery. Unfortunately, when we looked to get it propagated, it wasn't available at the time. But when we're talking about lager yeast, there's really only two strains. It's not like the wonderful variety of ale yeast that are available. So you've got 3470, which is the Weihenstephan strain, originally isolated by Carlsberg Brewery by can't remember his name right now. And there's a single other strain, which is a Zatzer type lager yeast, which isn't actually available commercially, at least for brewers of our size. So for lager, the biggest thing for us is to decide on a strain and get to know it and continue using it as long as we enjoy the beers that we're making with it. So we're not trying to change strains every couple of months. Have
you tried S189, Jeremy?
Sorry?
The S189, which is the other fermentous yeast. I think Holtz use it in their lager, and they've had some big success with that. It's quite an interesting. Is that I can't remember what that one comes from. Whether that's a Swiss one or something like that. Right?
Yeah, I mean it'll all be some form of 3470. So there's two strains that most places are doing. One of them's really clean, classic 3470, and then there's a fruitier strain which is going around. the styles of lagers that we're making are not fruity lagers, so we're looking to limit ester production and all of that. But there's, Italian Pils is becoming a thing. People are fermenting that warmer. They're looking for a bit of a fruitier profile to it, which is great. But yeah, we're quite happy with our strain, I gotta say.
Very good, very good. Another question: how many decoctions do you do, and what length of boil for each?
So we use decoction in 4 different recipes that we're doing right now. So for a darker or stronger beer, we're doing double decoctions. Usually we boil the decoction for 5 minutes, between 5 and 10 minutes, really. But we're really flexible with our approach to decoction mashing. So we're also doing a double decoction on the Pils, where we mash in at 60, pull a decoction, bring the temp up to 70, and that decoction isn't boiled at all. It's just brought to a boil. And then we pull another decoction, which we boil for 5 minutes to bring us to our mash out temperature. So yeah, I mean, you can get really creative just based upon the malt and the style that you're brewing. Typically, a darker beer, stronger beers will handle more vigorous boil or a longer boil for your decoction mash. Yeah. Very
good. I hope that answers your question, Ian. And a question from Tim Webb. The Czech way of referring to what you termed poorly modified malts is unrefined malts. They also claim that 2 to 3 times decoction mashing is essential if lengthy cold conditioning is to smooth out a beer. Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, coming from the German brewing school, British malts are over modified. German maltings would go nuts if they heard us calling their malts under modified. So it's all a point of view thing. And in the Czech Republic, there's a few barley varieties which are permitted to be malted and used in Czech beer, and a lot of them have similar modification on paper, at least, as German malts. But the talk about this lengthy cold conditioning, there's this concept that your beer needs to have some residual extract, some body, when it goes into cold conditioning. So when you've got incredibly little yeast activity, and I spoke about it a bit with traditional lagering, that brewers took lager beer or took their nearly finished beer, transferred it into pitched wooden barrels, and left it for 6 months so that they had something to drink in September and October. And they would transfer those beers with residual extract, which would be a function of how you mashed it, how many dextrins you have, which yeast can really slowly work on. And the longer you draw out that lagering or secondary fermentation in the lager tank, the longer your beer is going to be protected from oxidation and spoilage bacteria. So it's really looking at brewing from a completely different perspective. And yeah, I mean, I hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, okay, that answers Tim. Thoughts on a warm fermented lagers, so fermented at 18 degrees?
Yeah.
Some compounds.
So one of the best beers, or not one of the best beers, but there's a fantastic example of Pilsner being brewed in North Rhine-Westphalia. Very large brewer, one of the top 10 brewers in Germany, and their lager beer is fermented at 18 to 20 degrees. But to deal with that, they're fermenting under pressure. So you suppress, quite literally suppress higher alcohol production. And then they're taking steps like filtration with PVPP and silica stabilizers in order to make the beer palatable, or filtration with active charcoal even. As far as small brewers, looking to make lagers without a proper chilling system, which this question may have spawned from that. It'll taste different. It's not going to taste clean. My German professors might say you might get a headache from that beer. It can be done. It's I wouldn't do it, but you could.
Excellent, thanks, Jeremy. Gillian's bought some of your beer because she's really impressed by your passion for the subject, and so that's good.
Oh, thanks, Gillian.
Gino says W3470 can be fermented at high temperatures without compromising its neutral flavor profile. So thanks for that one, Gino. That's good help.
For the comment, yeah.
Yeah, and then any recommended reading or resources to look at into decoction mashes? Some more. Paul Evans says. Recommended reading.
For sure. So Narcissus is a really good resource. Ludwig Narcissus, he wrote a couple of textbooks on brewing in German, which have been translated to English. They can be a bit expensive though. Or Kunze is another classic German brewing text, which dives a bit further into decoction. There's not a ton else out there. So a lot of the research that I do is reading old German brewing textbooks, which are on Google Books from the 19th century, and trying to understand old German to get to the bottom of things. I think a lot of brewers out there are really open to sharing knowledge as well. So if you know somebody who's doing decoction, then get a hold of them and ask them any of the questions you've got, or email. That's fine.
There you go. We got another one from Tom. Thoughts on conditioning time for lagers? I know Heineken lager for just 1 minute. One of our landlords we're working with a range of lagers for insists it's not real lager if you don't lager it for 4+ weeks. We currently condition for a week. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. So actual lagering at like 0 or -1 Celsius, in a normal strength beer, you're only going to have benefits for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And a lot of that comes down to modern glycol chilling systems. So we get the beer colder faster. We have more control over the temperature. We get it colder than it used to be. We work on 4-week tank time. So if you've got 7 to 10 days fermentation and then just under a week at maturation temps 5, then we end up at 0 degrees for about a week and a half. And through the pandemic, we had lager that sat in tank for a couple of months. And there's no massive magical change that happens after that point.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that, Jeremy. We've got Tim saying he's looking forward to trying your British Pilsner, which is great news. Thank you, Tim, for that.
Thanks, Tim.
And Darren is said, I love Jeremy's passion, and as brewers, we all love lagers with some flavour. It's just a pity most lager drinkers don't want flavour. Carling dominates the UK market because it's cold, fairly flavourless, and sponsors a major sport. Is this the biggest challenge to craft lager? I love utopian lagers, but if you put it in a pub against, say, Peroni, would it sell?
Yeah, so as far as our premium British lager, which is the flagship, you could say, of the brewery, that beer is really designed to compete with beers exactly like Peroni. So I would describe it as having depth of flavor if you look for it, but if you don't, you can drink it like any other.
Or just squat it like a lager, yeah.
Now it's not 4% or 3.8%, so it will be more flavorful than Carling. But if you go after Carling and Carlsberg in the pub, or other session lagers, then that's definitely a losing game, I think.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you very much. I thought we finished, but there's another one in there from Tom. How much room is there for playing around with malt in lagers? Our American-style pales are only 70% pale malt at this point. Is there that room to play around with non-based malt in lagers? Non-base malt in lagers, sorry.
Yeah, really good question, Tom. So we're brewing two lagers which aren't pale in color. So we've got a Vienna and a Dunkel style, so a dark lager, and both of those beers are 90% non-pale malt or non-lager malt. So the Vienna's, about 50-50 Vienna malt and Munich malt, and the dark is almost all Munich malt. So totally, you can play around a ton, just like with any other style of beer.
Yeah, no, sounds very good. Well, excellent, Jeremy. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Really exciting. I've really enjoyed listening to you. Not just about the passion for the lager, but also the passion for some British ingredients as well, which is great news. Because that's where my heart is too. Trying to get some varieties that we can grow locally and get the industry moving again. Because the British industry is looking for more development, and there's certainly growers out there who want to grow more varieties and work with the brewers to develop what they need and produce exciting beers. So thank you again for joining us, and thanks to everybody for being on our first ever virtual HopWalk.